out of our house and take whatever you can carry." My brother said it while my mother's casserole dish was still warm on the counter. And my sister-in-law stood behind him, arms folded, watching me like I was something dirty that overstayed its welcome. I was 58 years old, still wearing the navy sweater I'd slept in beside my mother's hospice bed the night before she died. And in that moment, with one sentence, the family I had cooked for, borrowed money for, lied awake, worrying about, erased me from the house I had called home for 26 years. I didn't scream. That's the part people always expect. I didn't throw a plate or call him a monster or collapse into some dramatic heap on the floor. I just stood there with my mother's rosary still wrapped around my wrist and stared at the son she helped me raise after his first divorce. The same man who used to cry into my apron because he was scared of thunderstorms, and he wouldn't even look me in the eye. If you've ever had someone you love turn cold in front of you, so suddenly it feels like the air changed, then you know exactly how that silence feels. And before I tell you what happened next, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I always wonder how far pain travels before it sounds like somebody else's story. My name is Elaine. I'm not a saint. I've made mistakes, trusted too long, forgiven too much, stayed quiet when I should have spoken, but I loved hard. That was always my weakness. I never married. Not because I didn't want love. Life just kept handing me other people to save. When Dad had his stroke, I moved back home for a few months. A few months became 5 years. Then Dad died and Mom's arthritis got worse. My younger brother Graham had a talent for showing up when things were easy and disappearing when things were not. His wife, Denise, liked to call herself direct, which was a prettier word for cruel. They lived 40 minutes away, but somehow I was the one bathing our mother, lifting her, managing her pills, fighting insurance, paying the gas bill when her pension came up short, and sitting through those long, trembling nights when she'd whisper, "Don't leave me yet." So I stayed. I worked part-time at the library, sold jewellery I had once loved, stopped taking holidays, stopped buying new coats, stopped imagining a different future. I told myself family was family. That sacrifice meant something. That one day, if things ever got ugly, love would remember. I was wrong. The first crack came 3 days after the funeral. Graham started talking about practical arrangements. Denise started opening drawers that weren't hers. They began speaking in that low, fake polite voice people use when they're already counting what they think belongs to them. "This place is too much for you now," Denise told me, standing in Mom's bedroom, touching her silk scarves with those bright manicured fingers. "You should be grateful Graham's willing to take over." Take over, as if I had been some temporary house sitter. As if the years had not happened. As if my back had not gone weak lifting our mother from the bath. As if my bank account had not bled quietly into this house to keep the lights on. I said, "Your timing is indecent." Denise smiled. Reality doesn't wait for grief. That was when I knew she'd been planning it. But here's what I didn't know yet. Graham had already changed the locks on the side door. He had already called 2 men from a removal company. He had already told neighbours I was having a difficult episode and would be staying elsewhere for a while. That's how evil works sometimes. Not with horns. With paperwork, rehearsed concern, and a calm voice. By the next morning, they had moved my things out of the main bedroom and piled them into black bags near the hall table. Not the furniture I'd bought, not the framed photographs I had paid to restore, just my clothes, my toiletries, my slippers, my grief, all reduced to bags like charity shop donations. When I protested, Graham finally snapped. "For God's sake, Elaine, stop acting like the victim. You lived here because Mom needed help. She's gone now. The house goes to family." I remember laughing then, not because it was funny, because the lie was so large it knocked the breath out of me. "I am family," I said. Denise stepped closer. "Not the kind that counts." That line hit harder than being told to leave, because it told me what they had both been thinking for years. Unmarried, childless, useful but peripheral, good enough to serve, not important enough to inherit. I wish I could tell you I slapped her. I didn't. I looked at Graham, waiting for him to defend me. He adjusted his cuff and said nothing. That silence told me everything. By late afternoon, rain had started. Thin, cold rain, the kind that creeps down the back of your neck and makes you feel older than you are. Denise dragged my old suitcase out of the storage cupboard, the tan one with the broken handle I'd kept since the 90s, and dropped it by my feet. "Take whatever you can fit," she said. "The rest can be collected later if it's worth keeping." If it's worth keeping, I packed in a fog. 2 cardigans, underwear, my blood pressure tablets, the photograph of Mum at 23 standing barefoot on a beach in Devon, smiling into the wind, my library payslips, a little velvet pouch of earrings that had belonged to my grandmother. And then I opened the bottom drawer of Mom's dressing table. Inside was the blue envelope she had made me promise never to misplace. I froze. It had been there all along, months earlier. After a terrible night when her breathing had frightened us both, Mom had held my hand and said, "If anything happens to me, you make sure that envelope stays with you. Not with Graham. Not in this house. With you." I had laughed it off then, thinking it was fear talking. But now, with Denise yelling from the hallway for me to hurry up, I slipped the envelope under the lining of the suitcase, tucked deep beneath the zipper seam where no one would see it. That one movement changed everything. Still, I didn't know how much. Not yet. When I reached the front door, Graham blocked me for one final performance. "This doesn't have to be ugly," he said. I was standing there with one suitcase and nowhere to go. "It already is," I answered. Then Denise opened the door wide so the neighbours could see. That was the worst part. Not leaving. Being displayed, Mrs. Porter from next door was watering her geraniums under the eaves. The delivery driver at the corner slowed down. I could feel my face burning. My hands were shaking so hard I nearly dropped the suitcase. Denise tilted her head and said loudly, "You should be thankful we're being generous." Generous after 26 years, after every unpaid bill I covered, after every night I slept in a chair beside our mother, after I sold the gold bracelet Dad gave me at 30 just to pay the winter heating. If you think humiliation can't become physical, you've never felt it. It burns. It swells in your throat. It makes your legs weak. I walked out into the rain anyway. I made it as far as the bus stop before I sat down and cried so hard I thought I might be sick. My coat was too thin, my suitcase was damp. Cars hissed past on the wet road, their headlights smearing across the pavement. Nobody stops for a middle-aged woman crying in public unless she looks rich enough to matter or young enough to worry about. I had never felt so invisible. That should have been the end of me, at least the version of me I used to be. And if one person hadn't made a phone call that night, maybe it would have been. Her name was Marjorie Bell. She had been my mother's solicitor for years. A silver-haired woman with the posture of a judge and the patience of someone who had spent a lifetime listening before speaking. She called just after 7. "Elaine," she said, "I heard there was some unpleasantness at the house." "Tell me exactly what happened." I was sitting in a budget motel room paid for with the last money on my credit card. The wallpaper smelled faintly of bleach and old cigarettes. I told her everything. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she asked, very carefully, "Did you happen to take the blue envelope your mother kept in her dressing table?" I sat up straight. "Yes, good," she said. "Do not let anyone near that suitcase. I'll see you at 9 tomorrow." That was the first moment the story shifted. At her office the next morning, Marjorie closed the blinds, laid the envelope on her desk, and opened it in front of me. Inside were copies of receipts I had forgotten, notes in my mother's handwriting, and one sealed document that made my hands go cold. It was the deed, not to some investment property, not to a forgotten plot of land, to the house, and the owner's name on the most recent transfer was mine. I actually thought there had been some mistake. I remember whispering, No, that can't be right. Marjorie looked at me over her glasses. "Your mother transferred the property to you 18 months ago. Lawfully. Witnessed. Registered. She did it after you paid off the final mortgage balance and covered the renovation loan Graham never repaid." My ears rang. I had used my small inheritance from an aunt, plus 10 years of savings, to clear the house debt because Mom was terrified of losing the place. Graham promised he would reimburse me when his business recovered. He never did. And while I was blaming myself for being gullible, my mother had done something extraordinary. She had protected me. There was more. Tucked behind the deed was a signed statement from her doctor, confirming that at the time of transfer she was of sound mind. And below that, a handwritten letter in my mother's neat sloping script. "If my son ever tries to force Elaine out, let this be the truth he can no longer twist. She gave this house her years, her health, and her future. He gave excuses. She is not to be turned out of her own home." I broke then, completely. Not because of the house, because after months of feeling unseen, my mother had seen everything. Marjorie did not waste time. By noon, she had filed emergency papers. By 3, we had a court order. By 5, a locksmith, 2 uniformed officers, and Marjorie herself were walking up my front path with me. I will never forget Denise's face when she opened the door. Confidence first, that smug little half smile already prepared, then confusion when she saw the officers, then panic when Marjorie handed her the papers. Graham came charging from the kitchen. "What the hell is this?" Marjorie didn't even raise her voice. "This is notice that you are unlawfully occupying Miss Elaine Mercer's property. You will remove yourselves immediately." Silence, real silence, the kind that lands like broken glass. Graham laughed, but it sounded cracked. "That's absurd. This is my mother's house." "It was," Marjorie said. "Now it is your sister's." He looked at me then the way people look at a locked door they were certain would open. "No," he said. "No, she wouldn't do that." I held up the letter with our mother's handwriting. His face lost colour so fast it frightened me. Denise started talking all at once. There must be coercion. She manipulated an old woman. This is emotional abuse. "This is one more false allegation," Marjorie said, "and I will advise my client to pursue defamation as well." That shut her up. And then came the humiliation they had written for me, returning to them line by line. The neighbours watched from windows. The officers supervised while Graham and Denise carried their bags outside. Mrs. Porter stood under her umbrella, not watering geraniums this time, just staring openly as Denise stumbled past with an armful of designer handbags and fury on her face. Graham tried one last time. He stepped close and whispered, "Elaine, don't do this, we're blood." I looked straight at him. "I was blood when I paid your debts," I said. "I was blood when I buried our father. I was blood when I turned our mother in bed so she wouldn't cry from the pain. You only remembered blood when you were losing something." He had no answer. They left before dark, but justice didn't stop at the doorstep. Marjorie helped me uncover what else they had been doing. Money had gone missing from my mother's account in the weeks before her death. Denise had sold 2 pieces of jewellery without permission. Graham had forged a signature on a reimbursement request linked to the home repairs. There were consequences, legal ones, financial ones, public ones, the kind that don't vanish, because someone says, "Let's keep this in the family." Graham's business suffered once people learned why the police had been at the house. Denise's little circle of polished charity women stopped inviting her to luncheons when the court records became impossible to gossip around politely. Restitution was ordered. Contact was restricted, and for the first time in my life, I did not rescue him from the outcome of his own choices. That was my new beginning, not revenge, freedom. A month later, I painted the front door sage green because my mother always wanted to, but Graham said it would hurt resale value. I planted lavender under the window. I slept in my own bed without listening for accusation in the hallway. I cried sometimes. Yes, healing isn't pretty, it's quiet. It comes in uneven breaths and ordinary mornings when you realise the kettle is boiling and nobody is about to use your kindness against you. The suitcase still sits in my wardrobe, same broken handle, same hidden lining. People ask why I keep it. Because it reminds me of the night they thought I was leaving empty-handed. They saw one tired woman and one old case. They didn't see the truth stitched inside it. And maybe that's the lesson. The people who give the most are often the ones others underestimate. Quiet sacrifice looks weak to greedy people. Kindness looks easy to the cruel. But just because someone has been patient does not mean they are powerless. And just because someone is gentle does not mean they should be tested. If you've ever been pushed aside by the very people you stood beside, I want you to hear me clearly. Their betrayal is not proof that you were foolish for loving. It is proof that they were too small to honour it. So tell me, honestly, what would you have done in my place? Would you have let them stay? Or would you have taken your house, your peace, and your name back? And if this story moved you, like it, share it with someone who needs the reminder, subscribe for more real stories that stay with you, and comment your city below. I'd truly love to know where you're listening from tonight.